So we've been talking about the fugitive slave laws passed during slavery, and we started with what was it? Article 4, Section 2 of the Constitution. It was really entered to appease South Carolina. It gave slave owners the right to go after and retrieve runaway enslaved people, even if they ran away to free states. Those free states were pretty much compelled to help. Now, let's talk about the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1793 is one of a pair of Fugitive Slave Acts. So we've got the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793 and the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. Okay. Now, the Act of 1793 was similar to the Fugitive Slave Clause in many ways, but the Act included a more detailed description of how the law was to be put into practice. It authorized local governments to seize and return escapees to their owners and imposed penalties on anyone who aided in their flight. So the government can now seize runaway enslaved people. Okay. The law also imposed a $500 penalty on any person who helped harbor or conceal runaway slaves. But most importantly, it decreed that owners of enslaved people and their agents had the right to search for escapees within the borders of free states. So now I can go into a free state and search for a runaway slave. Now, the abolitionist groups in the North was not having it. They're like, this is not going to work for me. They organized clandestine resistant groups and built complex networks of safe houses to aid enslaved people in their escape to the North. The abolitionist groups didn't care that it was illegal. And ironically, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793 would be one of the reasons we got the Underground Railroad. One of the reasons. Overall, the northern states intentionally neglected to enforce the law. Several northern states even passed what was called personal liberty laws that gave accused runaways the right to a jury trial and also protected free blacks, many of whom had been abducted by bounty hunters and sold into slavery. But in Prigg versus Pennsylvania in 1842, the United States Supreme Court determined that personal liberty laws were unconstitutional. Because remember, what did the Fugitive Slave Clause say? It interfered with the Fugitive Slave Clause. It interfered with an owner retrieving their property, and that made it unconstitutional. The court held that while states were not compelled to enforce the 1793 federal law, they could not override it with other acts. In 1842, Alabama's Wetumpka State Penitentiary would receive its first prisoner, a white man sentenced to 20 years for harboring a runaway slave. And in 1851, Thomas Sims, a black man who had fled slavery in Georgia, was captured in Boston by police and ordered returned to his owner. Due to widespread resistance to the 1793 Act, Congress would pass the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which added more provisions regarding runaways and added even harsher punishments for interfering with their capture. And we'll be talking about that next. President and slave owner, President Number one, our first president, George Washington, was among the first to use the Fugitive Slave Act. When Ona Judge, a slave belonging to his wife Martha, escaped to New Hampshire in 1796, Washington placed ads, hired headhunters, and even sought help from federal officials, but never recaptured Miss Judge. Now, I want you to ask yourself, aside from an enslaved woman wanting to be free, what other reason would an enslaved black woman run? And if you've been listening to my lessons, you know the reason why.